There's a car park behind a scrapyard in the Midlands where I spend more time than I'd like to admit. Rows of estates nobody wanted. Traded in for peanuts, sitting there with full-service history in the glove box, half a tank of diesel, and engines that would happily do another 200,000 miles if anyone bothered to ask them to. Nobody asks. Everyone's chasing the same 12 hatchbacks on AutoTrader, paying over the odds for something with a cam bolt that's 2 months from disaster. While 20 feet away sits a car that will outlive the person buying it. I've been doing this a long time. Buying, fixing, selling, occasionally keeping. And there's a pattern that keeps repeating that nobody talks about on the big channels, because it doesn't get clicks the way a supercar teardown does. The pattern is this. The most reliable cars in Britain right now are the ones everybody's embarrassed to be seen driving. Estate cars. Diesel estate cars, specifically. The unfashionable middle child of the used market. So today I'm not doing a top 10 of dream cars. I'm doing 6 real ones. Cars you could buy this week for less than a decent second-hand sofa that will start every morning for the next decade without complaint. No sponsorships here, no dealer's forecourt gloss. Just what I've actually seen come through my hands and what's still going after everything else has given up. Before I get into the list, one thing. If you've ever bought a car because it looked right rather than because it was right, this one might sting a little. Stick with me anyway. Number 1. The Skoda Octavia Estate, the Mark II, particularly the 1.9 TDI and early 2.0 TDI PD engines, before everyone panicked about the injectors. People hear Skoda and they think budget. They think of it as the car your accountant drives. But strip away the badge snobbery and what you've got underneath is largely a Volkswagen Passat platform, built with a slightly more honest approach to cost than VW itself ever managed. I've had these come in with 300,000 kilometers on the clock, timing belt done on schedule, and the only real complaint from the owner is that the boot carpet's worn through from decades of dog walks and flat-pack furniture. The trick with these is the PD engines, pumped use, the ones before the common rail switch. They're agricultural. They clatter like a diesel should. But that clatter is longevity talking, simple injection, forgiving tolerances, and a bottom end that just does not wear out under normal driving. The catch, and there's always a catch, is the cam bolt interval. Do not stretch it. Do not let a previous owner's neglect become your problem. Get the belt and water pump done together regardless of what the paperwork claims. And this car will run past places your social life gave up on years ago. You'll find these for £800 to £1,500 if you're patient and willing to drive somewhere unglamorous to collect one. Nobody's queuing for them. That's exactly why they're cheap, and exactly why they're worth it. Number 2, and this one gets some hate mail whenever I bring it up. The Volvo V70, specifically the second generation with the 5-cylinder D5 diesel. There's a myth that Volvos are expensive to fix. That myth was built on Volvos from the 90s, and it hasn't updated itself since. The D5 in the second-gen V70 is genuinely one of the most underrated diesel engines to come out of Scandinavia. Torque that never seems to run out. A 5-cylinder note that sounds more expensive than the car actually was, and a structure so overbuilt that these things survive accidents that would write off lesser estates entirely. I bought one of these for a customer 2 years ago, paid £450 for it because the previous owner thought the turbo was failing. It wasn't the turbo. It was a boost hose that had perished, a £15 part. That car is still on the road now, still being used to haul horse feed twice a week, still hasn't asked for anything beyond oil and filters. Where these do occasionally bite you is the automatic gearbox on some variants. So if you're looking, prioritize the manual if you can find one. Or at minimum get the Autobox's service history checked properly, fluid changed, not the sealed for life nonsense some garages will tell you. Other than that, this is a car built by people who assumed Scandinavian winters and didn't build in any shortcuts. You inherit that over-engineering for the price of a decent bicycle. Number 3. The Mercedes E-Class Estate, W211 generation, the CDI diesels, ideally avoiding the earliest common rail versions and going for the slightly later, more sorted units. I know what you're thinking. Mercedes, surely that's expensive to run, and you'd be half right if you were talking about anything with air suspension or the electronics package gone wrong. But the core of this car, the drivetrain, the CDI diesel engine itself, was engineered during an era when Mercedes still built things to outlast their owners out of institutional pride rather than marketing necessity. I've seen these do genuinely absurd mileages. 400,000 kilometers wasn't rare on the ones used as private hire cars on the continent before they made their way to British auctions. The estate body adds almost no extra mechanical complexity over the saloon, just more steel and glass. And that steel, frankly, is part of why these things are still doing school runs a decade after everyone assumed they'd have been scrapped. The one thing I tell every buyer, without exception: avoid anything with air suspension unless you've budgeted for potential replacement, and get the AdBlue and EGR system checked on the later units if you're going for a slightly newer one. Stick to the earlier steel-sprung versions with the simpler CDI units, and you've got a car that will humble far newer, far more expensive machinery on sheer stubbornness alone. Now, a quick pause here, not to ask you for anything, just to say this. If you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who actually cares about keeping a car running rather than just posting about buying one. That's rarer than it used to be. I'll take that as enough of a compliment for one video. Number 4. The Peugeot 406 Estate, the HDI diesel, an absolute relic of a car now, and one that almost nobody remembers fondly, which is exactly the problem, because it deserves to be remembered. This isn't a car anyone's proud to own. It's not a car that gets a badge of honor on any forum. But, mechanically, the HDI engine in this thing, particularly the 2.0-litre, was one of the most bulletproof diesel units to come out of the 1990s into the 2000s. Simple fueling, no overcomplicated emissions nonsense, and a chassis so unremarkable it never gave engineers a reason to cut corners trying to make it exciting. I picked one of these up from a farm 3 years ago for £200. 200. It had been sitting under a tarpaulin for a winter, needed a battery and a new set of glow plugs, and it fired up like it had never stopped. That car went on to do another 18 months of daily driving for a young couple who couldn't afford anything else. And as far as I know, it's still going. The rust is the honest concern here. These cars are old enough now that bodywork, not the engine, will be what eventually ends one. Check the sills, check the rear wheel arches, check underneath properly before you commit. If the body's solid, the engine underneath it will very likely see you through whatever the body has left to give. Number 5. The Ford Mondeo Estate, particularly the Mark III, with the 2.0 TDCi engine before the later emissions tightening, made things needlessly complicated. Everyone in Britain has been in one of these. Taxi driver's car, company rep's car, the car your uncle had that nobody thought twice about. And that ordinariness is precisely the disguise. Ford built these to survive 150,000 miles of motorway driving without complaint. Because that's genuinely what they were designed for. Fleet use, taxi use, relentless daily grinding. And the diesel engine in particular was engineered with that punishment specifically in mind. I had a customer bring one in 2 months ago with 290,000 miles showing, original engine, original gearbox, and the only work it had ever needed beyond routine servicing was a clutch at 210,000 miles. That's not luck. That's a car built by people who understood exactly who was going to buy it and what they were going to do with it. Watch for the dual-mass flywheel wearing out, which is common on any high-mileage diesel of this era and not unique to Ford. And keep an eye on the EGR valve gumming up if the previous owner only ever did short journeys. Beyond that, this is a car that will do the job asked of it with almost insulting reliability, for a price that most people spend on a night out. Number 6. And I've saved this one for last because it's the one that surprises people the most. The Rover 75 Tourer with the BMW-sourced diesel engine, built during the period when Rover, whatever else was going wrong with the company at the time, had access to genuinely excellent German engineering underneath the bonnet. Nobody buys these. Genuinely nobody. The Rover badge carries a kind of stigma now that has almost nothing to do with the actual mechanical substance of the car, and everything to do with the company's collapse and the jokes that followed it. But look past the badge, and underneath you've got a diesel engine shared with contemporary BMW models, wrapped in a body that, frankly, was better built and better rust-proofed than most cars from British manufacturers of that era. I bought one of these 2 years ago as something of an experiment, honestly not expecting much. Paid £350 for it from a widow who'd inherited it and had no use for it. That car has now done another 30,000 miles without a single unscheduled repair. Not one. The interior, admittedly, feels like being wrapped in a slightly damp armchair, all wood veneer and soft leather that time hasn't been entirely kind to. But mechanically, underneath that faded Britishness, is genuinely capable German engineering that nobody's paying attention to, because everyone's too busy laughing at the badge to check what's underneath it. So there they are. 6 cars. None of them will impress anyone in a car park. None of them will get you a second look outside the school gates. But every single one of them, bought right and looked after properly, will outlast the finance agreement on whatever shiny new hatchback your neighbor's currently paying for. There's a lesson buried in all 6 of these if you want to take one away. The cars nobody wants are very often the cars that were built without anyone trying to impress you. No badge to protect, no image to maintain, just an engineering team somewhere quietly doing their job properly because that's what they were paid to do, decades before anyone thought to make a video about it. I'm not going to tell you to go and buy one of these tomorrow. That's not really the point of any of this. But next time you're scrolling through listings and you skip past an estate car with high mileage and a boring color because it doesn't look like anything, it might be worth stopping for just a moment longer than you normally would. Sometimes the car that never breaks down is the one that was never trying to be noticed in the first place.